And hello, and thank you for joining us for this Learning and Growing 2021 presentation, The New Way of Relating, Teaching Students in the Time of COVID. My name is Danny Shapiro, and I'm on the marketing team here at Hawks Learning. Our speaker today is Professor Felicia Hope Cate of Cape Fear Community College. Professor Cate is an applied sports psychologist specializing in coaching, counseling, and teaching mental health skills. She helps people deal with anxiety, stress, and performance issues. She's an avid writer and researcher and has done research on several books. Professor Cate is also an artist who de-stresses with painting, drawing, and watching the birds at the beach. We will have a live Q&A session with Professor Cate afterwards, so please enter any questions into the Q&A as we go. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to all attendees once the video is processed and ready for distribution. We are so excited to have you here today, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Like you said, my name is Professor Cate. What we're going to talk about today is, now that we're in the current and post-COVID times, there's different ways that we're having to teach students, not only for their performance, but also for their well-being. And I wanted to share some of those ideas that I have researched myself, and we're going to see how we can help not only ourselves as instructors, but also our students. So like you said, I am Hope Cate. My specialty is stress and anxiety. So when I started doing this research, I really was impressed that there is so much done about stress and anxiety in the time of COVID. So it really spoke to me. I wanted to research it more and see how I can apply that to helping fellow instructors with their classes. So the gentleman who really helped me see what was going on was Bob Fieldman. He is the chancellor at the University of Massachusetts, and he has a team that's researching learning science for college students. I did a webinar with him, and afterwards I talked with him and did my own research, and I discovered some of the patterns that could help us understand the additional stresses of students and why their work may be suffering. I'm sure many of you have noticed that our students are not as engaged, they're falling behind, they have more stress, they have more, I hate to say excuses, but excuses for not turning in their work, and it can get very, very frustrating for us. So we need to understand what's going on and then how to deal with it. And Professor Fieldman was really helpful with me in my own research to see what we can do to get the ball rolling. So let's think about the old ways of teaching. I hate to just say the old ways, but it's the ways that we've been doing it so far. So what the research has been showing us is that the old ways of teaching college students no longer really hold up to the new methods of how they learn. We've been understanding so much more about the young adult college mind that it's just amazing. So not only are we understanding how they learn, but we're understanding how to teach them in this personal time that we have. When we're looking at COVID protocols, not only are we looking at the protocols to keep us safe, but we're looking at the ways that it's going to limit our time with our students. It's going to limit their time with us. We have much more safe distance learning, online classes, hybrid classes, things like that, and which are great learning tools, but not everybody's able to transition as fast. Many college students have a hard time changing their patterns, changing their habits. So when we're putting this new formatting, this new distance between them, they get frustrated, they get confused, and they get a little scared. So in order to help them understand that and us understand that, we have to take away those old ways of teaching. Personal safety issues. Again, with COVID, with everything else going on, not only do we have to deal with our distances and our class changes, we have to deal with personal safety issues of people who have either a lowered immunity or are in a household with people with a lower immunity. You know, we have to remember this is not just about the individual, it's about everybody. So if we have students who have elderly grandparents in their house or health compromised parents or siblings, that's going to affect their ability to be present in class too. Our online learning has increased. Again, I am a huge, huge supporter of online learning. I feel like you're able to really get deeper into issues, but that's not true for everybody. And even though most of our students are on social media all day long, when we tell them to put that in the aspects of teaching, it doesn't always translate. So you're still having people who are confused, frustrated, still a little unsure how to go about things. And so we have to address that. We're also dealing with smaller class sizes. Now, most of us think that's great. We're able to communicate more one-on-one with our students. But remember, our students have been used to bigger class sizes. So not only is it a change for us, but it's a change for them. And they may have not liked those changes. They may not be on board with them yet because they like that anonymity that they have in class. So they don't have to be called on. They can just listen and take their notes. So there's a lot of ways of teaching that were quote unquote the old ways that we're trying to see how we can modify those thought patterns, those behavior patterns, and get to the new way of teaching, the new way of communicating with students. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to talk about a couple of things. The first thing is what I call the pandemic balancing act. It helps us understand what they're going through and what we need from them, kind of figuring out the balance between them. I'm going to share some emotional coping strategies with you guys. Now, I am a psychology instructor, so obviously, and being an applied psychologist myself, this is my bread and butter, helping people cope. But not all instructors have that ability or have the knowledge for it. So I wanted to share those with everybody to help as many instructors as possible. And then I'm going to talk about the 5 principles of learning science. We will end on that. This takes the learning science research that I've done and talked with Professor Fieldman about and applies it to teaching across the board. It's really good for all of us. So hopefully this is going to help you instructors understand the mentality of young adult learners better. It's going to help us learn new ways to encourage students to study better, which is always hard and always frustrating for us. And it's going to show us better ways of communication between instructors and students. Since we do have so much more interaction now, we need to know how to take care of that and how to help them deal with things that they're dealing with. So let's look at the research and see where we're at with things. So all this research that I'm talking about, I haven't listed every single piece because it would take up 3 or 4 slides. But it's been in the last 5 years. So obviously we have the learning research before COVID and then during COVID. So what we've learned that is our brains are still immature and growing from our teens to our early 20s. It used to be thought by about 18, 20, our brain was matured and we were considered a full adult. Well, now we are learning that it takes up to 25, 26 for our brains to fully mature. What that means is while we're still in that immaturity stage, we still have tendencies that adolescents and very young adults have. This can be things like risky behaviors, because since our brain is not fully functioned yet or fully developed, we have a tendency to want to push boundaries, to want to do things that aren't exactly safe, because that's where we're at. We're physically in that mindset. So we're leading to more risky behaviors. But in essence, what that means is we're more prone to hurting ourselves, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. We're doing things that we don't need to be doing yet because we don't know how to deal with them. Going into deep relationships, setting our goals too high and then having failures, going out with groups of friends, even though you're putting yourself more at risk of being sick, things like that. So what we thought was just, people acting out, now we're learning is still just literally immaturity. So knowing that now, we're seeing that, okay, well, the way we teach more immature brains have to adapt to that a little bit because they're not full adults yet. They're still adolescents, teens, young adults. So not only are we learning that, but Now, because of COVID, the last 2 years that we've been dealing with things, 91% of young adults are feeling stress and anxiety. That's a really high number if you think about it. Yes, our early teens and 20s is a tumultuous time for all of us. We're going through so much, we're figuring so much out. So a certain level of stress and anxiety is expected, but the reported numbers from the surveys is 91% now. And that kind of caught our attention. So we're trying to teach more coping mechanisms. We're trying to teach better ways to succeed so that they can have more empowerment in themselves to get things done. 81% now feel sadness. A lot of that deals with what COVID has forced them to do. Again, that's going to go with the next two numbers. But not only are they dealing with a pandemic, which they've never dealt with before, but they're dealing with the after effects of a pandemic. They're missing people that they once had. They aren't allowed to do the things they once were. And that can lead to feelings of sadness. 80% also feel lonely and isolated. Those two go together because they're not allowed to be together. They're not allowed to go visit their friends or, do the activities that they're normally doing because of the safety restrictions. So when you add in an immature brain and you put these restrictions on us, it's going to add up to a lot of negative feelings, a lot of negative emotions, and that causes a trickle-down effect in all aspects: their work, their relationships, their family, and in their school. So we have to understand that what's going on. It's not only us that are having a hard time, but it's them too. 48% have been saying they're having financial setbacks and or relocations. Every location that you guys are coming from has a different standard, obviously. You're in a different state of recovery. And where I'm at, we've just now opened a lot of the businesses, which is great. But up until this point, a lot of my students personally at the college I teach at did not have jobs. So if they don't have jobs, they can't pay their bills. And, having somewhere to stay and something to eat is a little more important than getting their work done. So now that they're able to work, it's great because they're making money, but they're having to readjust their whole mentality, their whole schedule, because not only are they working hard now, but they're still in school. So that's causing that extra stress. That's causing all that anxiety that they have nowadays. Relocations, I have had a number of students that have relocated and now they're in my online classes. Again, that's a great thing about online classes is they can be anywhere. But relocations that are not out of a desire but out of a need are not exactly favorable. So again, stress, anxiety, isolation, they're not near their friends. They're in a new environment. They don't know what's going on. So you can see how all these things are adding up to just a lot of problems for our students. And again, this is also for us too, but we're focusing more on the students right now. Because of all of these factors, about 1/3 of all the students surveyed, which was about 5,000 at this point, are reporting mental impairment since last May. That's a big, big number. And so again, we're just trying to figure out all the ways that we can help, all the ways that we can tweak things, modify things so that they can grow and we can grow with them. So unfortunately, because of those problems, this is leading to a socioeconomic impact. Many students don't have adequate hardware, meaning their computers, their monitors, their webcams, their microphones. A lot of schools now are lending that out now that they've got the grant money to purchase those things. If you have students that need items, contact your school. See if they have things that can be loaned out. Also check with financial aid. I know some aid programs are providing enough for them to get new laptops or tablets or video cameras. So it's important that we help them because if they can't get to us, even if they're in a class situation, they still need access to hardware. Many places are having lower internet access, and that is because more and more people are working from home and they're taking up the bandwidth. It happens. I live in a huge apartment community, And I work from home 100%, and I have for a number of years now, but even I have noticed that my connections are slow, and at night they drop for, a few minutes at a time. And it's because there's so many more people in the buildings that are staying home to work. And so students, which are trying to get on the computer to do their assignments or check their grades or, whatever, are having a harder time getting that access if they have a low internet plan. That's something we don't really think about. We're always concentrating on the work, but having these outside pieces are very, very important. A lot of students don't have a physical space to work. I actually surveyed a number of my students from some classes, and they're literally working from their dining room table while their parents are around, their siblings are around, their significant others around, their dogs around. And you can imagine trying to deal with all those people and animals while you're still trying to concentrate and work. It's very, very stressful because they don't have a space to do it in. When I talk to students that are having a hard time with that, I ask if their libraries are open yet. And if they are, go schedule a study room, or if the coffee shops are open, go to a coffee shop, sit in the back corner, headphones in so you can concentrate. Anything to get them out of the mindset of why is this happening to me, and figuring out ways to help them succeed. Because again, all this, they have higher stress on a daily basis. And again, it's just a combination of everything, not knowing the future, having to deal with sick people, not being able to see their friends, which are very, very important in the early years, and inadequate equipment, the socioeconomic impact. All of this is just forcing us to figure out how in the world are we going to help these students and keep classes going when there's so many factors against us. So how do we balance everything? I came up with what I call the pandemic balancing act of teaching. It's a big fancy term I came up with, and it just seems to kind of help us right now. So when we're looking at the pandemic balancing act, we're not only having to be aware of how COVID is affecting attendance and grades, but we have to figure out how it's affecting our students and us. We have to look at the physical health, the mental health, emotional health, even their family health, and their student education programs. When I say family health, people don't normally think about that, but think about if somebody in your household is sick, or somebody in your household is very, very depressed or has high anxiety. It's going to affect everybody. And so when our students are starting to get lower grades or missing grades, or they're not communicating with us, that's when we need to contact them. If we don't contact them, we don't know what's going on and we can't help, basically. So communication is a huge part of us trying to figure out a new way to teach these students in order to help them in the ways that we can, and also get them the help they need. A lot of students don't know about student services at the campuses. They don't know that they have free counseling there, or if they need to take a leave of absence for a while to relocate or take care of a sick one or anything like that. They don't know these things, but we do. So if we start that communication, we're able to help our students understand what they're going through and then promote the success that they need. They need to be successful in class, not only for a grade, but for their own mental, physical, and emotional health. So here's some tips that if you can share with your students if they're having a hard time concentrating and staying on track. Again, like I said, if you are any kind of humanities instructor, please do not think I'm talking down to you. These are psychology based, because psychology is all about our patterns of behavior and our emotional states. And so I try to make these as simple as possible for everybody. So first one, if you have students that are very, very uncertain about what's going on, they don't know if they can turn in their assignment on time. They don't know how to do an assignment. They don't understand it. They don't know if they can get it to you on time. All that uncertainty they're giving you. There's a couple things you can do. When you're emailing them, it's best to email, because that way they can see it. Sometimes people hear you say something, but they're not understanding it, or they forget it. So if you write it in an email, it's much, much easier for them to understand what's going on. First, ask them to identify what's making them anxious or uncertain or scared. We have to figure out the thing it is. Once you start thinking about that, you realize it's not the big, oh, it's just COVID, or, I don't have a job. It's much more specific for each person. Once they figure that out, ask them, is it something real or is it a what if? Now, there are real problems. If you lost your job, you don't know if you can make rent. That's a real problem. But if you're still working and you don't know what's going to happen, well, those what if questions, those come from a place of overthinking. This is where your thoughts and your feelings start looping, and you overemphasize the importance of things, even though those things may not be very important. It's important. It's important to understand: is it something real you're uncertain about, or is it a what if? They can kind of start figuring that out. And then there's some problem-solving solutions you can do. Again, I'm trying to make these as simple as possible for everybody. I always like to tell my students when they're having problems that we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And what that means is how we feel at the time, our perceptions of our world shape everything we think. So if I'm in a very bad place, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm scared, then my whole world is going to seem that way, even though it isn't. But if I'm in a happy place, I'm in a stable place, confident, my world view is going to look like that. So we have to remember how we see things and not necessarily how they are. There's no quick fix for feelings. We have feelings, we have emotions, they're part of you, but we just need to understand how to manage them so they don't get out of control. These are some great tips I give people, and they're very, very successful. Journaling. They can use any kind of notebook. I have little notebooks, I have fancy notebooks. Sometimes I have just a piece of paper I found. I want to write a couple things down and stick it in my pocket. Just getting the stuff out of your head and onto paper helps you, what I call, download it. If it's not up here rolling around, then it's not going to keep bothering you. And another great thing about journaling is once you start writing things down, you can look back and start seeing patterns. You're like, okay, every time I go to that class, I start feeling really anxious, and then the rest of my day, I'm nervous and stressed and everything. Okay, then what is it about that class? They start seeing these patterns to figure out things. Or every time I talk to this person, I feel mad the whole rest of the day. What is it about that person? These little things just seem so small and insignificant, but they're not. And these patterns of behavior help them realize what they need to start managing with their feelings and emotions. Going outside. Now, we're all cooped up. More people are being able to get out now, which is great, but we still have to keep in mind our safety protocols. But if you can just get outside on your own, or with your dog or whatever, just for 5-10 minutes at a time, connecting to nature is going to help you feel more grounded. It's going to clear out that jumble of thoughts so you're able to really understand what's going on. It helps raise your serotonin levels and all those good neurotransmitters that we need, our dopamine and such, so that we actually literally feel better. Physical activity does the same thing. Just go for a walk. If you don't have a gym membership, or you can't go to your gym yet, or you live on a very busy street and you're in an apartment building, go outside, walk up and down the stairs. I've done that myself. If I'm sitting here all day working on the computer and I'm like, oh, I need to start moving, but it's pollen season right now, which is, I have huge amounts of allergies. So I actually like to start walking around my apartment. I look completely silly, but thank God my husband's not home. Anything you can do to keep moving. At night, you can go to your gym at night. That way you can wind down with some good physical activity. And sleep. Sleep. We all need good sleep. Not only do we need sleep, but it actually clears and cleans our brain out. All those tidbits of information that get stuck up there, just like in a computer, when we sleep and take naps, it cleans all that out. So then we're not overthinking as much, and we're able to see things as they are, not as we are. The third way I like to help people is with their emotional coping. Now, obviously, we have things like, the stress, the anxiety, understanding what's going on. But when they're dealing with a situation, whatever the situation is, there's going to be an emotional concept to it. And we need to teach them ways to cope. I like to use the 3 words: acceptance, compassion, and boundaries. People say boundaries. Yes, boundaries. Acceptance. Accept how you feel at the moment. It doesn't mean you approve of how you feel. It's just more of an acknowledgement of it. I feel really mad right now. I'm mad. I'm going to be in that moment for a bit, and then I'm going to let it fade away. Or I feel scared. I feel uncertain. Anything at all. Acknowledge the feelings. We see a lot in social media and commercials and stuff. It's like, oh, you don't need to feel that way. You don't need to feel that way. You don't need to act that way. Acting is different than feeling. But yes, we are human. We are going to have the full gambit of emotions. Accept them. Just feel it for those few minutes and then move on from it. You get so much release from that. Compassion. When we're dealing with our own stuff, we get very, very isolated and small. So if we can get out of that bubble and help other people, it actually helps us too. Again, it boosts our good neurotransmitters. It gets us out of our head. We're able to see the world more as it is. Compassion can be anything from helping a neighbor carry their groceries to their car, reaching for something that an elderly person can't reach, stopping a neighbor on the street and saying hi. You don't have to actually do a bunch of chores with people. Just be nice to people. And when we do those simple things, it helps us break that isolation. It helps us break that negative cycle that we're in. And then boundaries. We all need boundaries. This is very, very important for your own peace. Figure out what you will and will not tolerate from yourself and others. What do I mean? Well, if you're a very emotional person, you're an emotional person, you accept that acceptance, and then you're kind to other people, so they're kind back to you, your compassion. But realize where you're going to draw that line. Are you going to let yourself downward spiral to depression or into the why is this happening to me stage? Or are you going to let yourself get so angry that you want to throw things? We have to figure out our own boundaries. Once you establish those boundaries, you're able to keep yourself in check. This is also true for other people. How much are you going to let them treat you? Some people will just be a doormat and let people walk all over them. That's not acceptable. Figure out where your boundary is and stay in it. Once you are in your boundaries and you keep them, just realize they're not going to pass those boundaries. You're not going to let them. You won't be intimidated, and you can just relax into that. Boundaries are a good thing. It's not a bad thing to have those. You're protecting yourself and you're protecting others. So with all that information, can our students rebound? Yes, they can, but we're going to have some issues to still deal with. The rebounding is going to look different than just going straight back to the way things are. They're still going to have financial struggles. Like I said, here in Wilmington, where I'm at, they've just now opened up a lot more businesses, so people are going back to work, but they're still struggling. They're still catching up. We're still having a lot of short-term loans, which are going to have to be paid back. They're still going to be dealing with grief at this young age. Many people have lost elderly grandparents, uncles, aunts, co-workers even, children, parents, sisters, brothers. It's still a lot to deal with because it happened so quickly. The other thing that we researched and found that as students are rebounding to a quote unquote more normal life is they're experiencing a change of their worldview of their expectations. Used to be, you went to high school, you picked the college, you went to college, and that pretty much, you could set where you want to go and you do it. But because of everything that has changed, many businesses have closed or downsized or changed their formatting and their structure. What they were experiencing and expecting is not always what it's going to be now. So there's a lot of reorganizing of their worldviews and figuring out what they're going to do now, now that the world has changed. And so part of us having to revamp and redesign our stuff is understanding these rebound effects. And we'll get there, everybody will get there together, but it's going to take some time. So the way we can help with the rebounding is with the learning science tips I'm about to give you guys. These help promote interactions with our students, and they help them develop more self-regulation skills, which are super important. They're part of that emotional coping strategies I gave you earlier, but this is applied more in class formats. So let's look at the 5 principles of the learning science that I put together for you. There's many, many more, but I think these are going to help you the most for right now. When we're looking at how we can redesign and reformat our classes, there's 5 principles that we can go off. And I'm going to go through those for you. The first one is active engagement. Try to avoid long lectures with no participation. While you're talking and giving your lecture, ask questions. Get them involved. Ask them to give examples instead of you giving everything to them. When we involve the students more like that, they're going to pay attention more and they're going to be invested more. Supplemental and relevant materials, videos, and articles. Like I said, I teach completely online right now. I will be teaching some hybrid classes in fall, but I give my students a lot of videos, a lot of articles that are current for them to comment on and actually teach me about. And it seems to really get them involved because they feel like they're part of it. They're actively engaging in class. They're the ones talking to each other about the lesson itself. I'm not just the dictator in class. I'm more the facilitator. It seems to really be helping. We're going to have to teach our students how to be successful. Remember, good students aren't made, they're not born, they're made. And so we have to give them multiple opportunities to interact. What this means is sometimes we got to keep the class more fluid. We have our schedule set up, we have our calendar set up, but there's times where you can feel that we need to talk more about a certain subject or less about a certain subject or add in new information. And so we have to be able to keep things fluid, keep things geared toward them to be successful, not for us to just give our lessons. I like to always give tips on assignment management. If I have things coming up during the week, I email them beforehand. I give them a little tip about it, or I'll talk about the subject and even give them my perspective about it. Just anything to keep the conversation going, to keep them involved and engaged in the activities. Shorter and more often due. I like to do that because if you give assignments and have it due at the end of the week, they're going to get it done probably fast or at the very end, but there's not going to be anything in the middle. If you have your assignments staggered throughout the week, they're much more involved and they actually learn it better because they're more involved. You have something due on Wednesday, and you have something due on Friday, and you're emailing them before each one. That's 4 layers of communication you're giving to them, and they're giving back to you. You can see how that's much more engaging and much more dynamic than just saying this is due at the end of the week. We're trying to keep them activated. We're trying to keep them motivated. We're teaching them how to manage their time better. We're teaching them how to stay organized. All these are important ways of success. Use technology to your benefit. Now, this can be a touchy subject with some instructors if they haven't used technology a lot. It is a learning curve, and I acknowledge that. There's a lot of webinars out there. NC State actually has a huge program for instructors to help them with online learning techniques and strategies, but use technology to your benefit. Use social media. I actually have a whole lesson that I talk about social media, and then they have to use social media to complete the assignments. It seems to really help. Discussion posts, I don't see that as a stagnant thing anymore. It can be very engaging, very interacting. There's a new program called Harmonize that they put on Blackboard. I think they have it on Moodle too, but it's much more dynamic looking. It looks a lot like Instagram looks, and so they recognize the format and can use it easier. But discussion posts really can get conversations going. They can produce much more intimate details, much more personal information, so that they can interact like they're just talking to each other. Have them make their own assignments. I like to do this when we're talking about subjects that deal with like personality or stress and coping. We actually have lessons on that. And I ask them, what stresses you out or how do you cope with things? So they're actually the ones making the lessons and teaching it to themselves and others. Like I said, I'm just the facilitator. When we're using that technology to our benefit, again, it's engaging them more. Videos and photos as part of assignments. Some students really love making videos, and I've actually had some come to me and say, hey, can I do a video presentation about that instead of like a 5-page paper? And I'm like, sure. I give them, the details. It has to be a certain amount of minutes and whatever. And they love it. They love that fluidity that we give them in class and let them teach a subject. I had a couple come in and they were pretty much experts. They were non-traditional students, but they were pretty much experts in the subject. So I said, well, hey, why don't you teach it to us? And they loved it. They got together and they taught the subject, and the students really got involved because it's another student teaching them things. Again, it's all using that technology to benefit people. Clear expectations set in class. People always work better when they have rules, boundaries, and limitations. Men, women, children, dogs, everybody. When a student knows exactly what you want, they're much more comfortable in their role. There's no guessing about it. This is when I have my syllabus. I have it very detailed, and so they understand exactly what's expected of them, when assignments are due, how assignments are supposed to look, how they communicate with me, how I communicate with them, all the things they need to have those boundaries set up. I also highly recommend you have a response policy in place for you and your students. Because we are using technology so much more, let them know that you have a 24-hour response policy. If you email them something, a question or whatever, they have 48 hours or 24 hours to get back to you. And you can actually put that as a grade in your grade book. Participation grade, communication grade, something like that. Attendance grade. When they have that, not only do they know they have to get back to you, but that you will get back to them in a certain amount of time. It's very important now because, again, communication through technology is a different beast altogether. I always like to have a class calendar. This will actually go week by week, tell them what chapter we're going to do, if they're going to have an assignment that week. But again, remember, this is fluid, so they understand that too. We may have things move a little bit differently, but we're going to stay within pretty much these guidelines. And then the last one is have clear boundaries. We talked about that earlier, touched on a little bit with response time, but have clear boundaries for you and your students. You need space too. You are very stressed out. You all have very, very important jobs, and we need to take care of ourselves just as much as we take care of our students. So set those boundaries about response time. Have office hours, have study help hours, have a study help mentor or another teacher that can help you if you get overloaded. Set your own hours. If you work remote, work just like you would in your office. You work 10 to 6 a day or 10 to 5 a day, and you don't work on weekends. Don't check your school email on the weekend. That is your time. You need it just as important as your students need it. This helps promote the interaction so they won't fall behind because they have those clear boundaries of when you are available and when you are not. They don't just send an email out and just wait. They know if I send it and it's within these parameters, they'll get back to me in 48 hours. And again, I always like to have that communication grade for especially online classes, because when they do that communication with you, the response time, it helps you know that they're following what's going on and that they're still interacting in class, but it gives you another way to help their grades. So I always like to put that in as a communication grade. Since that's something we don't normally have in face-to-face classes, the students kind of like it. So that's what I have for you guys. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you understood how this new way of thinking about things is going to help us in the future.
Hey, thank you so much, Professor Cate. I will remind our audience that they can go ahead and ask questions. We have a few minutes left in our time. We already have a question here from Beth, who asks, how do you balance asking for more frequent due dates with giving busy students flexibility?
The way to balance with that is to start at the very beginning. When you set class up, when you talk with them in the first week, you're going to let them know we're going to have, more frequent due dates, but even make the assignments a little smaller. Instead of having a 5 to 6 page paper due on Friday, maybe have a 2 to 3 page paper due on Wednesday and a discussion post due on Friday. That way they're still doing the same assignments, you're still getting the same feedback you need, so you understand, they understand the information, but it's broken up into smaller segments.
And our next question is from John, who asks, what type of communications do you include for a grade?
I include everything that I send out to them. Any kind of email I send to them, if I give them any kind of grade feedback, usually when I'm giving grade feedback, there's a reason for it, not just good job, but your information was good, but your formatting was off. Check the formatting information under getting started, or your citations were off. Do you need a recap on those, or your grammar was off, or your content itself was not exactly what we were looking for? Can we talk about that? Anytime I contact them and I expect a response, I include that in my communication grade. And it can be as simple as just having a list of names, and you give them a little check mark every time they get back to you, and you can see how many give you responses. Or even if you're just checking in with them to see how they're doing, and when they get back to you, I include that also in my communication grade.
And as a follow-up to that, Laura asks, what % of the overall course grade is the communication grade? And would you consider oral exams to be appropriate as part of what you've talked about today?
That's a good question. Oral exams, if they're in class or even online as a video or something, I still count those as an assignment. That way that they get full credit for that information. And what was the first half of that question? I'm sorry.
What percentage is the communication as part of the overall grade?
Oh, yes. I do 20% because I do my exams at 30 and 30. I do 2 exams in a semester, and the rest is filled in with homework assignments. That way they understand that it is an important part of their grade, and they're not just going to flip it off if it's only like 5 or 10%.
Another question here from Art. What kinds of activities do you do for your active engagement during the lectures?
During lectures, I like to do group activities. Now, obviously, if you're doing it online, you do breakout groups. If you're doing it in class, within parameters, you do that. I had this great one I'll share with you guys. When we're talking about perception and the senses, I actually give each small group a bag of things that are in Ziploc bags, and they have to reach in, each person of the group reaches in to grab one bag, and without looking at it, they have to figure out what it is. And then they hand it off to each person, and they have to do it too, because they're blacked out bags, they can't see it. And so not only are they engaging together to figure things out, like an investigative thing, but they're also using their senses. And you can see almost childlike action when they're doing this, because if you think about all our college courses, they're very adult. We're sitting there, we're getting lectures, we're getting responses and back and forth, adult stuff. Now remember, these people are not quite adults yet. So if we can give more childlike wonder activities, they get so engaged. And then when you ask them to write up the results, or give me a recap of what happened, they will write for pages and pages because they had so much fun. So I like to do group activities if I'm able to work in class. When I'm working online, I like to use things like the little tests they have online. An example is when we talk about personality, I picked out 3 or 4 personality tests online. Ones like, what kind of animal are you, or what color are you, and things like that. And I have them take those tests and then do a discussion post about them. And so they have to reply to each other about the discussion post, compare their results. Oh, I was a cheetah, what were you? I was a lamb. Oh, that means, I'm probably going to eat you. Rah, rah, rah. Silly things like that. But it gets them talking, it gets them engaged. And so anytime we can pick things out from the social media world where they live and use it in our class, is going to help us improve our class.
Thank you. And a few last ones I want to try to get to. This is kind of a big question, but from Roseanne, how can we balance the sensitivities of the current environment with the expectations of being a student?
That's a really good question. The main thing is we have to see the student as a person, not as just our student. That's been a really hard thing for us because we work in statistics. We work on their grades, how they're doing in class, what's due, what they haven't done, but we're forgetting that that's a person too. So what I like to do and what I've been helping other instructors do is get engaged more with student services, get engaged with the student counselors. And so if we start to see students who aren't showing us a lot of spunk in class, or they're not, they were very on target with things and now they're slacking off. And even when you email them, they're coming back to you saying, I'm dealing with a lot right now, which I have a number of students who are. I immediately get them in contact with counseling, because it's not our job as instructors to be their counselor. We're their helper, we get them the help they need, but we can't put all of that on ourselves. So we have to use our own helpers, which is our student services. And so a lot of times what's happened, I actually had a student who had a nervous breakdown. I immediately contacted student services and they got with her, and then they contacted me, and what we did was we put her on academic leave so that she didn't suffer for it, because she didn't plan on having a nervous breakdown, and she was able to come back to class. And when she did come back to class, I talked with her a little bit to see how she was doing, and she did great. And actually now she's in my upper level class and doing fabulous. So having that sensitivity to where our students are as people, I always turn straight to student services, because they can help in ways that I can't help or that I don't have time for. I hope that helped.
Absolutely, thank you. And see if we have time for one more question is, how do you get your students to do the optional work? Warren says that if he suggests a good article to read or video to watch, sometimes students are less likely to do it if there's no credit involved.
Oh, I don't have optional. It's included in the lesson. Because of what you just said. If you say, hey, check this out, they'll be like, yeah, whatever, it's not important. Is that part of my grade? No, then I don't care about it. I incorporate all my supplemental material into my lesson. So maybe an example I can give you, we just talked about communication styles, and we were talking about the Sternberg's theory of love. It's all the different ways that we have love relationships. So instead of me talking about the whole theory in my lesson, I actually told them at the end of the lesson, they're going to watch a video now about the Sternberg theory, and then they're going to report on the questions at the end of it. So instead of just having me talk about it and then have a video saying the same thing, I made the video part of the lesson, which worked for me because it was less work for me, but it see how it put that video into the lesson, so they had to watch it in order to write the paper. But yeah, I pretty much don't do like supplemental optional, because like you said, they just won't do it. But if you can incorporate it, then you got a great lesson.
And we had a comment from Schmitty who chimed in that for his optional activities, he offers extra credit points. So he doesn't count off if they don't do anything, but it's a chance to earn some extra rewards.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, they love hearing extra credit.
Okay, well, we are out of time. Thank you so much to all of our audience for participating. Professor Cate, thank you again for being part of our Learning and Growing series and for your presentation today. Again, we did record this. If you have extra questions, you can email those to us at marketing@hawkslearning.com, and we'll make sure to get you a link once the video is processed. So I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Thank you.
Bye.